on my way back to Williamsburg on the interstate. I went over the day and tried to analyze the relief I was feeling. I knew that part of it stemmed from the culmination of a long and protracted ordeal. But I also hoped that now that he was dead, I could stop feeling as though I were living in his immense shadow. Already, I missed my father terribly. But I missed the man who had nurtured me through my youth and my early manhood, not the legend against whom I had measured myself for so long. The funeral took place at noon on a crisp fall day, whose chill was softened by a high overhead sun. Every seat was taken. With my mother seated on my left and Toddy on my right, I bowed my head for a moment's prayer before the service began and risked another look around the church. Across the aisle, there was seated a contingent of Marine Corps generals, 36 strong, many of whom had come down from Washington on a specially arranged helicopter to honor one of their own. Most of them were contemporaries of my father, still ramrod straight in their retirement, and now assembled to mark the end of an association that for some had spanned 5 wars and 50 years. At the conclusion of the indoor part of the service, an honor guard of 4 Marine sergeants from the Marine Corps barracks at the 8th and I streets in Washington, D.C. bore my father's casket from the chancel. And as they passed our pew, my mother clutched my hand, and we followed the procession to the family burial plot adjacent to the church. Outside, the wind stirred the stately elms and oaks of the churchyard, and as we passed through a cordon of Marines standing at attention with their white-gloved hands raised to the brim of their hats, I watched the brown and gold dying leaves of autumn skip merrily across the route to my father's grave. After the family members were seated in the folding metal chairs parallel to the grave, and the honor guard had placed the casket on the lowering device, the crowd from the church filed in around us, and the minister began. Man that is born of a woman hath but a short time to live, and is full of misery. He cometh up, and is cut down like a flower. He fleeth as it were a shadow, and never continueth in one stay. Before Toddy and I returned to Williamsburg, I drove down to the churchyard alone to visit my father's grave one last time. The gravesite was ablaze with floral arrangements of every size, shape, and color, and its gaudy patchwork of vivid hues contrasted starkly with the dying leaves of the surrounding trees and the brown autumn grass. I was at last alone with my father, my God, and my thoughts, but I was as yet unable to sort out the conflicting strands of a desolation that had been building within me since that last tear had run its course down my father's cheek. He was gone now, and I was grateful that Toddy had gotten to know him, however briefly, and to see the kindness in him before he died. I knew that my children would have their lives touched by the recognition that history had given him, and I wished that they, particularly my son, could carry some memory of him that was more than vicarious. I also wished that I had been more like him. And I wondered if I would always find myself inadequate when I compared myself with him. He had been a wonderful father, and I was fortunate to be his son. but it had not been easy living in his shadow. As darkness fell, and I took leave of his grave, I wanted him back. And I wanted him gone. After we got to Williamsburg that evening, I looked in on my sleeping children, and then at last fixed a drink. For a long time after Toddy had gone to bed, I sat in the darkness of our family room, periodically going to the kitchen to replenish my glass and waiting for the blessed numbness that would wash away the turmoil. Well, unfortunately, the turmoil was not over.